So I've always assumed Lumen was the beginning,
I believe it was.
and so the
I think.
question, what started all this,
Okay.
and when you started, did you think this is going to be a huge series, or was
Oh
it going to
well.
be a one-off?
Well, let's say that whenever you take a step, it could take you around the block or it can take you just indoors. It turns out it took me around the block a few times, but then
Hmm.
life took me around the block a few times. But,
Yes.
I'm fascinated by basically three things. Mirrors, that's unless to reflect myself, unless it's dark in the room.
Yes.
The military, as you know, and mysteries. So the idea was, why not make a little leisure demand, putting together the mystery, the military, and the mirror. The mirror is a specular perspective. So the idea was to have something that tells about crime solving at war, but at the same time, it looks at it from a different perspective. We all grew up with, war movies where we knew where the good guys were.
Yeah.
And I was always kind of curious, whatever happened to Maleficent and whatever happened to the other guys. So that was the idea. And the series began really very organically. There was no plan. I'm
Mm.
chaotic. I never have a plan. Primordial broth is my sort of guideline. Something will pop on the surface and I'll pick it up or not.
Yeah.
But I had one stroke of good luck. When I began and I was working on Lumen, it turns out that Spielberg was planning to do Schindler's List, but he hadn't gone to Krakow yet. So I was in Krakow just a few months earlier, and I got to see the ghetto, abandoned as it'd been in 1941, and it struck me deeply. The void, the emptiness, the forsaken place. And I said, how can it together? That was the genesis, basically. The rest came organically by itself. As I had more things I thought I had to say about the character, about the war, about how complicated beliefs and the good and bad are in our lives and those lives. So
Yeah.
that was the idea.
The next question was the Stauffenberg parallels,
Um,
and of course everyone harps on those because it's easy
yeah,
to bring up.
true.
Um, but there are big differences between Bora and Stauffenberg, and
Yeah.
I wanted to hear you a bit about that.
Well, I'm glad you say that because sometimes, we build idols and we live in a period where we topple statues. So at the same time, we make heroes and we topple statues. So we're pretty ambivalent about all that. I
Mhm.
am ambivalent myself because I love heroes, but I also want to be able to topple them if necessary, or I deem that, I put up the wrong hero or something. It's not Stauffenberg's case. However, Stauffenberg is a man who always works at the top of the military. He's basically not an on the field officer. He's a major, fantastic organizer. And you look at war very differently. It was same thing with von Paulus in Stalingrad. He's basically an organizer. And it's not the same thing. Bora is a man who fights in the field with his men, has a different take on what the war is. By 1944, he sees the German army as co-responsible of genocide and all kinds of wrongdoing. And I think he believes the German military to be unforgivable. So at this point, what can you do? At this point, you can do daily what you can do, but a sort of, purifying act, which is controversial to this day. I'm in contact with descendants of the attempters of the 20th of July. It's very interesting to talk to them because they live in a world which is basically sure of their own fathers and grandfathers' beliefs. Looking at it from the outside, I realize that today in Germany, and not alone, the act of killing the commander in chief, as we would say in the States, is still a controversial thing in the middle of a war.
Mm.
What is Trump saying these days? Well, we have a crisis, so you cannot change your commander in chief. So it's a controversial act. Basically, Bora will never betray his brother officers, but it takes exceptions on the fact, I think, that some of them see themselves as members of a post-Hitler, non-democratic Germany, whereas he believes that the military has done its thing, not very well, and should step away from it and not be involved in politics.
Yeah.
But basically, I think those are the big differences.
Yeah.
And he's not in any way a narcissist. And I think in some ways, in the best possible um, acceptation of the word, you have to be a little of a narcissist to be wanting to kill the commander in chief. All that would be wiped away as it was.
Yeah.
So I think there was also a personal investment in how do we save ourselves, our families, our world, which is essentially the Kaiser's world.
Yeah.
And Bora, from this point of view, is much more of a socialist, even though a national, socialist, in that he sees that no more. This is late. We cannot present ourselves to the Allies. Why should they believe us?
Yeah.
We are Nazi officers.
Yeah.
Our careers were built during this time.
Yeah.
So
maybe
it wasn't their fault, but had I been in the Allies, I would have said, sorry, guys, you've had a few years to do this, like 11 years. Where were you in 1933? Basically, some of them were very young, but, other people have acted differently, even within Germany.
The next question is about research.
Yep.
And obviously the books are meticulously researched and always have a mix of fictional and real people. But tell us a bit about how you do it, how long it takes, your methods.
Well, it's like, when Edison said that it's 90% perspiration and 1% inspiration. I think mine is like 70% research. My readers, I'm very fortunate that way, are very often professionals in the field. They're people who work in law, or work in the military, or work in history. So, or they're very informed detective stories readers. You cannot fool them. So I have to be accurate. And fortunately, I know enough of them that, I get to correspond with them and learn the things I cannot find in books. Sometimes it takes up to 3 years. The Stalingrad novel I'm working on now is lasting more than the siege of Stalingrad. I mean, it's taking forever. There are thousands of pages written, and I have to choose and pick what I can use. And I can only lie up to a point. I have fictional characters. We're liars by definition if we write fiction, but you have to be attentive, not to bend history. It's got to be, a credible, even probable scenario, alternative, but probable, not just something up in the air. I cannot have Adolf Hitler, survive the war. It'd be ludicrous. So a lot of research, a lot of primary sources primarily. And then historians, some of whom I love, some of whom, I hardly love at all, but I need them all.
And well, give us an example of some of those you love.
Okay, I think that some of them you cannot do without. Little Heart, you cannot do without. Beaver, you cannot do without. I don't know, Peter Hofmann, for example, for the German resistance. He's written the book, literally. I don't know, for Italy, Klinkhammer, I even met him. He was at the time a graduate student, and now he's one of the principal historians of German occupation of Italy and the Mediterranean.
But he also has a sort of a whistleblower role.
Oh yeah, indeed. Yeah. And that's his problem, I think, but primarily the fact that he's there with the Abwehr, and therefore he is, so to speak, a watchdog on his own army.
Yeah.
But a watchdog and a whistleblower is also, so to speak, someone who's snitching on others. So it's, when do you quit being a hero who exposes evil, and when do you become a rat? So you have to walk very carefully. He has to walk very carefully. He knows where right and wrong is. I don't. So he'll have to tell me. I have no idea. I'm just a visitor here myself.
And then the next question is related to works of fiction that take place in time of war, whether you have books that you adore or that have influenced you in the fictional area.
Many. I think my generation grew up with war movies and war novels, so big choice. My absolute favorite, Josef Roth's Radetzky March. I think that is
The top.
there's nothing more to be said.
I agree.
It's all in there.
Yeah.
But Dr. O's The March, very good. Ambrose Bierce's short stories take place during the Civil War. And one work that nobody seems to know, I don't even know if it was translated into English, which is Hans Wichert's Die Majorin, The Major's Wife. It is an incredible, incredible novel written circa, I think, 1939, maybe. Takes place in the first aftermath of the Great War in East Prussia. And it's an incredibly sensitive, war-based novel about love and loss, and I think it's a great story. And Crane's Red Badge of Courage. That was really my eye-opener. How can you be an impressionist, not using color, but using the description of colors? I think it's a master.
Yeah.
And more, today's the 20th of July. 76th anniversary of the bombing plot.
I see. I didn't even think of that. It was
there you go.
Time for the interview. So the next question is, if someone is new to this and has never read a Bora,
okay,
where does he or she start? Where would you recommend this is the one to dig into?
Okay, can I give him a choice? My very first choice would be Lumen, because I'll tell you why. And the other one would be A Dark Song of Blood, and I'll tell you why. I mean, they're equivalent in that they go to the core, which is the minutiae of trying to solve a crime when millions are dying. And why would you bother with that? And also the complex personality of the character. I mean, the protagonist is a complicated man. He's not an easy guy. He's a difficult guy. But I think it's part of, you have to know that to understand what he's done when he was younger and what he'll do when, you know, he's more grown up. And his dilemmas and the fundamentals of his love life. I mean, it's a very complicated relationship with his wife, Benedict. I mean, it's amazing how some women, and I believe this, I think for men, most men, a woman can be really a sort of make and break issue in their lives, more so than for women. I think Carl Gustav Jung was right in that when he said, you know, women have a more diffused idea of the men in their lives, and men have the woman in their lives. And I think these two novels point that out, which is important for most of our lives. Yeah. That's not what I thought.
I just have such a huge soft spot for Horseman's Song.
Me too.
Love that book.
Why is that?
So in a way, I would say to someone, but it's a dangerous recommendation to start with it.
So no one knows the Civil War.
Yeah, and in fact, what I love about it is there's not that much action. There's a lot of observing the one and the other, and then relationships, again, about women.
Yeah.
I just love that book. So it's tempting for me to say start with that, and it's the first chronologically.
You certainly can, you know, you can have your own suggestion, because to me, you know, they're all my children. You know, how can you choose your child? You know, there's the easy son, the difficult son, the son that smiles a lot, and the one, you know, doesn't smile if you tickle him. You know, they're kids.
My next question was, what's on your bedside table?
Aside from crossword puzzles, so you know that.
I didn't even know you're a puzzler.
I'm totally, especially if they're cryptographic, where, you know, basically you have to figure out what fits in there. Totally. But I have right now, and I just bought it. It's an old edition of Franz Kafka's novellas and short stories and fragments. And to me, every time I read it, I say, this man had an incredibly chaotic mind. Couldn't get himself to finish a novel. But it doesn't matter. It's one of the few times in which you say every sentence is a gem and it means something. It's plainly written. Another thing I appreciate and learn from, you know, you don't have to use the big words. You have to be thoughtful, which he is. And the other one, completely different, something completely different, as Monty Python used to say, which is Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, because she writes in such a dense way, just the opposite. It's dense and it's baroque and it's glorious and it's juicy. So I need to keep those things in mind. I read them because I like them, but also because, you know, I'm an old lady. I got to learn every day I can. If I were 20, I'd be reading, light literature. But now I got to learn to make hay while I may.
Yeah, everyone. So to end on an even lighter note, so when you work, do you listen to music or do you work in total silence?
When I write, actually, when I quote unquote create, we all more or less have to do it. No music. When I edit and reread plenty, I confess I love country western music. The somebody done, somebody wrong songs. I love the songs. I love.
Anyway, so it's time for me to thank you.
And time for me to thank you.